It was one of those days that seemed to be straight out of a postcard. The sky was a perfect blue, the sun warm but not too hot. And I was taking my two kids, Ethan and Mia, to Forest Park. It's this massive park in Portland, Oregon, with hiking trails, picnic areas, and playgrounds. We were meeting my friend Rachel and her kids there for a casual afternoon. Everything seemed perfectly normal as we arrived. The kids ran straight to the swings, laughing, and I found a bench to sit on, enjoying the peace of the park. Rachel wasn't far behind, and we chatted about life while keeping an eye on the kids. Mia was content in her stroller, and Ethan was already off playing with Rachel's kids. The park was full of families and the air smelled like fresh grass. But as I sat there, I noticed something strange. A boy. He couldn't have been older than 11, but there was something odd about him. He was alone, wandering near the playground but not playing with any of the other kids. His clothes were disheveled as if he had been out here for hours, maybe even days. His hair was matted and unkempt, and his face, I don't know how to describe it. There was something in his eyes that unsettled me. He wasn't smiling, he wasn't laughing. He was just watching the other kids, watching me. His eyes were too still, too focused. I tried to shake off the feeling. Maybe he was just a shy kid, or maybe he was waiting for someone. But I couldn't stop glancing over at him. I didn't like the way he moved, slow and deliberate, like he was studying everything around him. After a while, Ethan wandered off to the seesaws. He was the kind of kid who always wanted someone to play with, and I was planning to get up and go join him when I saw the boy approach him. I didn't hear their conversation, but I saw the boy speak to Ethan, and then Ethan nodded enthusiastically. I thought to myself, that's odd. Why is he talking to my son? The boy didn't seem to smile or laugh. He just said something to Ethan in his flat, emotionless voice. I watched from a distance, thinking maybe I was just being paranoid. But then, without saying anything else, the boy grabbed Ethan's arm and started pulling him toward the trees at the edge of the park. I immediately got up from my bench. What the hell? I called out to Ethan, but the boy didn't seem to hear me. My heart skipped a beat. Something wasn't right. Why was this kid taking my son into the woods? I rushed over to the seesaw area, my legs moving faster than my brain. As I reached them, I saw Ethan struggling to pull his arm out of the boy's grip. The boy wasn't forcing him, but he wasn't letting go either. I yelled again, louder this time. Ethan, stop, come back! The boy froze for a second, then looked up at me with those same unsettling eyes. Ethan pulled his arm free and ran back toward me, tears in his eyes. The boy didn't follow. Instead, he just stood there, watching us. For a moment I thought he might speak, but he didn't. He just turned and disappeared into the trees like he had never been there at all. I hugged Ethan so tightly that he squirmed. What happened? I asked, panic rising in my chest. Ethan wiped his eyes. He said he knew where Ryan from Ryan's Toy Reviews lived. He said we could go visit him. That's why I followed him, Mom. I felt the blood drain from my face. Ryan's Toy Reviews. Ethan had been obsessed with that channel for years, but why would some strange boy want to take him into the woods to see someone he didn't even know? Ethan, I said, kneeling to look him in the eyes, you never, ever follow someone you don't know, especially into the woods. Do you understand? He nodded, still confused but scared. He didn't understand why I was so freaked out. But I did. That night I couldn't sleep. My mind kept replaying everything that had happened, everything I had seen. The boy, his eyes, the way he grabbed Ethan's arm. Something didn't sit right with me. Who was he? Why was he alone in the park? And why did he act so wrong? The next morning, I couldn't get it out of my head. I decided to go back to the park. I needed answers. Ethan had stayed with Rachel's kids, and I had a good hour to myself. I parked near the edge of Forest Park and walked down the same trail I'd taken yesterday. The sun was out again, but everything felt off. The birds weren't singing like they had been, and there was an eerie silence around me. I walked toward the spot where I'd seen the boy. Everything looked the same, except for the absence of the playground and the laughter of children. It felt too quiet, too still. I looked around, half expecting the boy to just appear out of nowhere, but he didn't. Instead, I saw something that made my stomach drop. A piece of paper, crumpled and tossed on the ground. It was a flyer for a missing child, someone who had disappeared around this park years ago. I bent down to pick it up, the words staring back at me in bold black letters. "Have you seen this child? Last seen playing in Forest Park." The photo on the flyer was of a boy about the same age as the kid I had seen the day before. The same messy hair, the same dull eyes. My heart began to race. No, this couldn't be happening. But as I stood there, looking at the flyer, I had a sudden realization. That boy I saw yesterday, the one who took Ethan, he was the same boy from the photo. I rushed back to my car and drove home, my hands gripping the wheel so tightly my knuckles turned white. There was no way I was going back to that park, no way. I didn't go back to Forest Park for several weeks after that. Every time I thought about it, I felt a shiver run down my spine. I told myself I was just being paranoid, that it was just a coincidence. But I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. Then, one night, I got a message from Rachel. She had been at the park with her kids again, and guess who had appeared out of nowhere? The boy. I couldn't believe it. He had approached Rachel's kids the same way he had approached Ethan, saying something about taking them to a special place in the woods. When Rachel saw him, she immediately pulled her kids away. But the boy just stood there, staring at them, like he was waiting for something. Rachel had called the police, but by the time they arrived, the boy had vanished into the trees. The officers had searched the area, but there was no trace of him. I felt a cold shiver go down my spine when I heard this. Something about this was far darker than just a lonely kid. But what was his purpose? And why did he keep trying to get children into the woods? A few months later, I decided to go back to the park again. This time, I wasn't going to just hide away in fear. I needed to know if there was something bigger going on. I packed up Ethan and Mia and told them we were going for a short walk through the park, hoping the daylight would give me some peace of mind. We reached the playground, and everything seemed fine. The kids ran ahead to play, and I watched them, my eyes scanning the area. The park was peaceful again, just like it had been that day when I first brought them here. But then I saw him. He was standing at the edge of the trees, his face still as blank and emotionless as the first time I saw him. But this time I wasn't going to let him get to Ethan. I walked toward him, my heart racing. "Why are you doing this?" I demanded, my voice trembling but firm. The boy didn't respond. He just stared at me, his eyes cold and empty. And then, from the darkness of the trees, I saw others, more figures moving in the shadows. They were humanoid, but wrong. Twisted shapes, barely human, with eyes like black pits. I tried to move forward, but I couldn't. I was frozen in place, unable to move or speak. And then I heard the boy's voice again, soft and cold. "They've been waiting for you." Before I could respond, I felt a sudden rush of air, and the ground beneath me seemed to shift. I snapped out of my daze and grabbed Ethan's hand. "We're leaving. Now." We ran back to the car, and as I looked in the rearview mirror, I saw the boy standing by the trees, watching, waiting. I'll never forget the night I decided to try Connect Now. It was winter break, and I was back in Chicago, bored out of my mind. Most of my friends were still stuck at their colleges, and the thought of spending another evening binging reruns sounded unbearable. Everyone kept talking about dating apps, so I figured, why not? It couldn't hurt, right? It was a Thursday night, prime time for these apps, or so I'd heard. I downloaded Connect Now, set up my profile, and spent way too long picking the perfect photos. You know, the ones where I looked like I was living my best life without trying too hard. I added a bio that said something simple like, 21, student at UIC, love basketball and bad horror movies. Nothing crazy. Once I started swiping, it felt kind of addicting. I swiped right on a bunch of people just to see what would happen. For a while, nothing did, and my confidence started to take a hit. But then, out of nowhere, a notification popped up. "Congratulations, you have a new match." Her name was Madison, and she was gorgeous, like way out of my league. Her pictures looked like something straight out of a catalog. One of her in a sundress, another with her laughing at a beach, and one where she was posing in front of some campus building. She said she was 20 and went to Syracuse University. I sent her a simple, "Hey," because honestly, I didn't know what else to say. To my surprise, she replied almost immediately, "Hey, cutie." That threw me off. I wasn't used to girls being this forward. We kept chatting for a bit, and she seemed super interested in everything I had to say. She even called me adorable at one point. Then, out of nowhere, she asked, "What are you doing tonight?" "Not much, just watching a movie," I said, trying to sound chill. "OMG, no way. Me too. You should come over. We can watch it together," she replied, adding a winky face. I was caught off guard. I mean, who just invites someone over like that? But she seemed sweet and normal, and I wasn't about to spend another night alone. I agreed, and she sent me her address. It wasn't far, only about 10 minutes from my place. Before heading out, I showed my roommate, Jake, her profile. He smirked and said, "Dude, she's probably a catfish. Be careful." I laughed it off, but part of me felt a little uneasy. Still, I grabbed my keys, told Jake I'd be back in a couple of hours, and left. When I got to the address, I felt my first real wave of doubt. The house was on a quiet street, but not in a charming way. It felt deserted. The kind of place where you wouldn't hear anyone scream if something went wrong. 2 cars were parked in the driveway, which seemed weird since Madison said she lived alone. I texted her to let her know I was there. She replied almost instantly, "KK, go around back. The front door is loud." That seemed odd, but I shrugged it off. Maybe she just didn't want to wake up neighbors or something. I got out of the car and started walking around the house. The yard was dark, and there was no fence separating the front from the back. As I passed a side window, I saw something, or someone, move behind the blinds. It was fast, like whoever it was didn't want to be seen. My heart started pounding, but I told myself it was probably Madison, just checking to see if it was me. "Was that you at the window?" I texted. No reply. I hesitated, standing there in the cold, staring at the dark backyard. I could have left right then. I should have left right then. But curiosity got the better of me, so I kept walking. As I turned the corner into the backyard, the uneasiness hit me like a brick wall. The house was completely dark, no lights on inside or out. For someone who invited me over, Madison sure wasn't making it easy to feel welcome. The backyard itself wasn't much better. It was a small patch of dead grass with a few plastic chairs scattered around, one of them tipped over. The only thing that looked halfway decent was a sliding glass door that led into the house. But even that looked old and slightly warped, like it had been there for decades. I stood there for a second, debating what to do. I texted her again. "I'm at the back door. Where are you?" Almost immediately, my phone buzzed. Her response, "Come in." Something about those 2 words made my stomach twist. No explanation, no reassurance, just "come in." I took a step closer to the sliding door, peering inside. It was hard to see much through the dirty glass, but I noticed something that made my heart race. Right by the door, there was a faint glow, a phone screen, and it was moving, like someone was holding it. "Madison?" I called out, trying to sound confident, but my voice cracked halfway through. No response. I reached for the handle of the sliding door, but stopped myself. I don't know why, but I suddenly felt like I was being watched. That's when I decided to call her. I dialed the number she texted me from, but something weird happened. Instead of ringing normally, my screen flashed "Text now, audio call." My chest tightened. I knew what that meant. A fake number. While I stood there processing that realization, I heard it. The faint sound of a phone ringing from inside the house. I froze. The ringing was so close, it was like the phone was pressed right up against the door. And then it stopped. The glow from the phone screen disappeared, leaving me staring into pitch blackness. My legs felt like they were cemented to the ground. Every instinct was screaming at me to get out of there, but for some reason, I stayed. Then I heard it, a sound that made my blood run cold, a faint creak like someone shifting their weight on the floor inside the house. I backed away from the door, trying to move as quietly as possible. My heart was pounding so hard I could feel it in my ears. I turned and started walking back toward the front of the house, but as I did, I heard another noise, this time from the side yard I'd just walked through. It sounded like footsteps. "Hello?" I called out, my voice barely above a whisper. No answer. I quickened my pace, trying to act calm even though I felt anything but. As I rounded the corner to the front yard, I glanced back over my shoulder. That's when I saw it, someone standing in the backyard, partially hidden by the shadows. I couldn't make out their face, but I could tell they were watching me. My fight or flight instincts finally kicked in. I sprinted to my car, fumbling with my keys as I unlocked the door. Once I was inside, I locked it, started the engine, and peeled out of there as fast as I could. When I got home, I slammed the door behind me and leaned against it, trying to catch my breath. My roommate, Jake, looked up from the couch and said, "What the hell happened to you?" I couldn't even explain. All I could do was sit there shaking as I checked my phone. I had 10 new messages from Madison's number. Sitting there on the couch, I stared at my phone, dreading what the messages might say. My hands were shaking as I opened the first one. "Where'd you go? Thought we were hanging out?" The second one was even creepier. "Come back. I'm waiting for you." The rest were variations of the same thing. "Why did you leave? Don't be shy. You seemed so cool." Then there were the last 3 messages. They were different. The first one said, "I'm not actually a 20-year-old girl, but I'm sure you figured that out by now." My heart dropped. The next one, "No laws were broken. LOL. Good luck." And finally, "I know exactly what you look like. And I have your number." I couldn't breathe. My mind raced with questions. Who the hell was this person? How did they know what I looked like? "Dude, are you okay?" Jake asked, snapping me back to reality. I didn't even know where to start, so I just handed him my phone. He read the messages, his face going pale. "This is messed up," he said. "You should report this or something." I nodded, but honestly, I didn't even know where to begin. The messages kept replaying in my head, especially the last one. I tried to tell myself it was just some creep messing with me, but the thought of them watching me through that glass door, it felt way too real. I blocked the number and opened the app to unmatch the account, but it was already gone. Madison, or whoever they were, had deleted their profile. The next few days were a blur. I couldn't stop looking over my shoulder, wondering if I was being followed. Every time my phone buzzed, my stomach twisted in knots. One night, about a week later, I got a call from an unknown number. My first instinct was to ignore it, but something told me to answer. "Hello?" I said, my voice shaky. At first there was silence, then faint breathing. I hung up immediately. Over the next few days, the calls kept coming, always from different numbers, always the same silence or heavy breathing. I couldn't take it anymore. I stopped answering altogether. Then, late one night, I got another text from an unknown number. "Still thinking about me?" That was it. I knew I had to do something. I filed a report with the police, but they didn't seem too interested. "It's probably just some prankster," the officer said. "Block the number and move on." But I couldn't move on. I felt like I was being watched everywhere I went. Every shadow, every strange noise. It all felt like a threat. One night I was lying in bed, scrolling through my phone, when I got another message. This time it wasn't words, it was a photo. It was a picture of my house, taken from outside. I jumped out of bed and checked every window, every lock, but no one was there. The next morning I bought new locks, security cameras, and even considered moving out. I thought I was finally starting to regain control of my life. But then I got one last message. "See you soon." I didn't sleep that night. How could I? That last message, "See you soon," felt like a promise. not just a threat. I sat in my room with the lights on, my baseball bat by my side, constantly refreshing the live feed from the security cameras I'd installed earlier that day. The house was silent except for the occasional creak of the floorboards. Every sound felt amplified, every shadow seemed to move. Around 2 a.m., my phone buzzed. My stomach dropped. It was another text from an unknown number. "Come outside." I froze. My heart was pounding so hard I thought it might burst out of my chest. Slowly, I pulled up the security camera app and checked the live feed. At first, I didn't see anything. The yard was empty, the street quiet. Then I noticed something. Movement in the shadows near the corner of the house. A figure was standing just outside the glow of the porch light, partially obscured by the bushes. It was a man, tall and broad-shouldered, wearing a dark hoodie. He wasn't moving. He was just standing there, staring directly at the camera. My hands trembled as I texted back, "Who are you? What do you want?" A reply came instantly. "You invited me. Remember?" I couldn't breathe. This wasn't just some random creep anymore. This was personal. I didn't want to give him the satisfaction of knowing I was scared, but the truth was, I was terrified. My fingers hovered over the call button for 911, but something stopped me. What if calling the cops made him angrier? What if he decided to break in before they got here? Then the camera feed flickered. For a split second, it went black, and when it came back on, the man was gone. I scrambled to check the other cameras, switching between the front yard, the back, and the driveway. Nothing. It was like he'd vanished into thin air. I sat there, gripping the bat, staring at the screen, waiting for something to happen. Minutes passed. Then an hour. Nothing. By 4 a.m., I was convinced he'd left. I was exhausted but too wired to sleep. I decided to go downstairs, check the locks one last time, and maybe grab some water. As I reached the bottom of the stairs, I noticed something. The front door was open, not wide open, but cracked just enough for a sliver of cold air to seep through. I knew I'd locked it. Every nerve in my body screamed at me to run, but I couldn't leave. This was my home. Slowly, I crept toward the door, bat in hand. My fingers wrapped around the doorknob, and I pulled it open in one quick motion. Nothing. The porch was empty. Then I noticed it. A small piece of paper folded neatly on the welcome mat. With shaking hands, I picked it up and unfolded it. Written in bold, messy handwriting were 3 words. "This isn't over." I moved out of that house the next week, changed my number, deleted every dating app from my phone. For a while, things were quiet. I started to believe it was over. But sometimes, late at night, I still check the locks twice. I still glance at the cameras, and every time my phone buzzes, I feel that same cold dread, wondering if it's him. Because deep down, I know he's still out there. Last year was a whirlwind for me. Between work, school, and trying to keep my sanity intact, I barely had time to think about dating. But one night, while lying in bed scrolling mindlessly through my phone, I stumbled across Tinder. Everyone had been talking about it, so I figured, why not? I wasn't seriously looking for anything. It was more curiosity than anything else. I mean, what's the worst that could happen? It didn't take long before I matched with someone. Her name was Emily. She had this radiant smile, light brown hair, and these soft green eyes that immediately pulled me in. She seemed like a real catch, and honestly, I wasn't expecting much on my first night using the app. After a few casual messages back and forth, we exchanged Snapchats. That was when I knew for sure she was real. We sent a few snaps. Her face, her surroundings. Everything checked out. She told me she lived in Cedar Creek, about 30 miles outside of the city. I'd heard of the place, a small, cozy town with a good reputation. She seemed sweet, normal even. Nothing felt off. So when she suggested we meet up, I thought, why not? I had nothing planned for the next day, and neither did she. She offered to host at her place, and while it was a bit unorthodox, she made it sound casual. Nothing fancy, just 2 people hanging out. The next day rolled around and we set a time for 10:30 p.m. Yeah, it was a little late, but I didn't mind. I figured it'd make for a more relaxed vibe. Around 10 p.m. I started driving toward Cedar Creek. The town was about a 45-minute drive from my place, so I gave myself plenty of time. Halfway there, she called and asked if we could push the meetup to midnight. No big deal, I told her. I had a couple of friends in the area, so I swung by their place to kill some time. When 11:45 hit, I said my goodbyes and punched her address into my GPS. As I drove through Cedar Creek, I couldn't help but notice how peaceful the town seemed. Almost too peaceful. The streets were eerily quiet, and the occasional streetlight flickered, giving everything a slightly unsettling glow. Eventually, I pulled up to the address she'd sent me. A big white house sitting at the end of a cul-de-sac. It was the kind of place you'd expect to see in a Hallmark movie. Picturesque and almost too perfect. I parked in the driveway and called her to let her know I was there. She picked up almost immediately but sounded confused. "I don't see you," she said. "Are you sure you followed the directions right?" I double-checked the address, but before I could respond, she interrupted. "You know what? Let me just send you my current location. Sometimes GPS can be weird around here." Her new location was only about 15 minutes away. It felt a little strange, but I shrugged it off. Maybe she'd just sent the wrong address earlier. It happens, right? So I followed the new directions, not knowing that this drive was about to take a very dark turn. The GPS led me out of Cedar Creek's cozy little neighborhood and onto a long, winding road surrounded by open fields. At first, it wasn't too bad, just empty stretches of farmland on either side. But as the minutes ticked by, the scenery started to change. The well-paved road turned into a bumpy dirt path, and the warm glow of streetlights disappeared completely. All I had was the faint light of my car's headlights cutting through the pitch-black night. The further I drove, the more uneasy I felt. This wasn't the kind of place you'd expect anyone to live, let alone someone who supposedly came from a nice suburban neighborhood. I kept glancing at my phone, double-checking the GPS, hoping I'd made some kind of mistake. But no, the little blue dot was moving exactly where it was supposed to. After what felt like an eternity, I saw a dim light in the distance. As I got closer, it became clear that the source was a single flickering bulb above the porch of a small, rundown house. The place looked like it had been abandoned for years. Peeling paint, boarded-up windows, and a sagging roof. There were no cars in the driveway, no signs of life anywhere, and the only sound was the crunch of gravel under my tires as I pulled up. My gut was screaming at me to leave, but I convinced myself to stay. Maybe Emily was just embarrassed about her living situation. Maybe this was all some kind of misunderstanding. So I parked my car, left the engine running just in case, and called her again. "I'm here," I said, my voice a little shaky. "Okay," she replied. "I'll be right out." Her tone was calm, almost too calm. I waited by my car, staring at the house, expecting the front door to swing open at any second. But when it finally did, what I saw made my stomach drop. A figure stepped out onto the porch. At first it was hard to make out any details, but as they moved closer to the light, I realized it wasn't Emily, or at least not the Emily I'd seen in those pictures. This person was wearing some kind of black veil and a long, tattered dress that reminded me of something out of a horror movie. In their hand, they held what looked like a small doll. Something about it gave me chills. I froze. My brain was scrambling to make sense of what I was seeing. Was this a prank? Some kind of weird joke? I scanned the area, half expecting to see someone jump out with a camera yelling, "Gotcha!" But the figure just stood there, completely still, staring at me through the veil. I was just about to get back in my car and leave when I noticed movement behind her. Another figure appeared, stepping out of the shadows. This one was wearing all black too, but there was something even more unsettling about them. They had a machete in their hand, and they weren't just standing there. They were moving toward me. Fast. Panic set in. I didn't even think, I just turned and bolted for my car. My hands were shaking so badly that it took me a second to get the door open. As soon as I was inside, I locked the doors and threw the car into reverse. The person with the machete was almost at my window when I hit the gas and sped back down the dirt road. My heart was pounding so hard it felt like it might burst out of my chest. Just as I thought I was in the clear, I heard it. A loud bang. A gunshot. I ducked instinctively, gripping the wheel so tight my knuckles turned white. I floored it, not daring to look back. My car roared down the dirt road, the tires skidding on loose gravel as I pushed the gas pedal to the floor. My breaths came in sharp, panicked gasps, and my heart felt like it was about to explode. The only thought running through my head was, get out. Just get out. The narrow road twisted and turned, and I could barely see more than a few feet ahead. My headlights cut through the darkness, revealing nothing but endless cornfields on either side. The eerie silence of the night was broken only by the sound of my tires and the occasional rustle of the wind whipping through the stalks of corn. Then, my phone started ringing. I nearly jumped out of my skin. The name on the screen read, Emily. My stomach dropped. I didn't answer. Instead, I blocked the number and threw the phone onto the passenger seat. Seconds later, another call came in, this time from an unknown number. I didn't pick up. The calls kept coming, one after another, like some kind of sick game. It felt like they were mocking me, taunting me. My hands gripped the wheel so tightly they started to cramp, but I didn't dare slow down. I had to get back to civilization, back to safety. As I finally reached a paved road, I spotted the dim lights of a gas station up ahead. Relief washed over me. I pulled into the parking lot, turned off the engine, and sat there for a moment, trying to catch my breath. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting an unnatural glow over the empty pumps. The place was deserted, but at least it wasn't the middle of nowhere. I stepped out of the car and leaned against it, my legs still shaking. I needed to calm down, to think, what the hell had just happened? Who were those people? And why had they lured me out there? The gas station door creaked open as I walked in. The cashier, a middle-aged man with a scruffy beard, barely glanced up from his magazine. I grabbed a bottle of water from the cooler and made my way to the counter. "You okay, buddy?" the cashier asked, finally looking at me. I hesitated. Should I tell him? Would he even believe me? "Yeah," I lied. "Just a rough night." He shrugged, clearly uninterested, and rang up the water. As I handed him a crumpled bill, I caught a glimpse of a poster on the wall behind him. It was one of those old missing person notices, faded and curling at the edges. The photo was of a young man, probably in his early 20s, with a smile that seemed forced. The name underneath read Michael Carter, and the date of his disappearance was 2 years ago. Something about it made my blood run cold. The town name, Cedar Creek, was listed at the bottom. I didn't stick around to ask questions. I grabbed my water and bolted back to my car. As I sat there, staring at the empty road ahead, I couldn't shake the feeling that I had just narrowly escaped becoming the next name on that wall. But I wasn't in the clear yet. My phone buzzed again. Another unknown number. Against my better judgment, I answered. "Hello?" At first, there was nothing but static. Then a voice. A low, distorted whisper. "Why did you leave?" I dropped the phone like it was on fire and slammed the car into drive. My tires screeched as I sped off into the night, not caring where I was going as long as it was far away from Cedar Creek. I drove aimlessly through the night, desperate to put as much distance as possible between myself and Cedar Creek. My hands gripped the steering wheel so tightly they ached, but I couldn't relax. Not yet. The road stretched endlessly in front of me, illuminated only by my headlights, and every shadow seemed to shift, as if something, or someone, was following me. When I finally reached the outskirts of the next town, I pulled into a well-lit parking lot outside a 24-hour diner. The place was mostly empty, save for a couple of truckers nursing cups of coffee inside. I parked as close to the entrance as possible and slumped into my seat, trying to process everything that had happened. My phone sat on the passenger seat, its screen cracked from when I'd dropped it earlier. For a while, I just stared at it, too afraid to touch it. But eventually, curiosity got the better of me. I opened my call log. The last call, the one with the distorted voice, was still there, but the number was gone. No record, no trace, like it had never happened. I felt a chill crawl up my spine. My hands shook as I opened my messages, but there was nothing there either. Every message Emily had sent me was gone, and the original address she'd shared vanished. It was as if she, and everything tied to her, had been erased. I didn't sleep that night. Instead, I waited until morning and drove straight to the nearest police station. The officer at the front desk looked skeptical as I recounted everything. The Tinder match, the drive to the house, the figures in black, the machete, the gunshot. When I mentioned the second location, his expression darkened. "That place?" he said, almost to himself. "That property's been abandoned for years. There's no one living out there." He called for backup, and a small team of officers went out to investigate while I stayed behind. Hours later, they came back with nothing. No sign of anyone, no footprints, no tire tracks. Just an old, crumbling house surrounded by empty fields. "You're lucky," one of the officers said as I prepared to leave. "Not everyone who goes out there makes it back." I drove home in silence, the weight of everything pressing down on me. For days, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. Every time I walked into a room, I'd check over my shoulder. Every time my phone buzzed, my heart would race, half expecting to see her name pop up. But it never did. I deleted the app and swore off online dating for good. Even now, months later, I can't forget the look of that figure on the porch or the sound of the gunshot ringing out behind me. I don't know what they wanted or what would have happened if I hadn't left when I did. But one thing's for sure, they weren't planning on letting me leave alive. So, if you're listening to this, let my story be a warning. No matter how real someone seems online, no matter how harmless they appear, never trust a stranger. And if you ever find yourself driving down a dirt road in the middle of nowhere, turn around. Because sometimes the only thing waiting for you at the end is a nightmare. Winter in Portland can be brutal. Freezing rain, endless gray skies, and the kind of cold that seeps into your bones. Nights like that, you just want something to pass the time. For me, that meant firing up Connectus, this dating app I'd been using on and off for a while. I wasn't exactly looking for the one, but I liked meeting new people even if most conversations fizzled out after a few messages. Then there was Maria. She was different. Her profile picture wasn't flashy, just a simple selfie. Her dark hair falling over her shoulder and these piercing green eyes that drew me in. Her bio said she loved late-night drives, horror movies, and rainy nights. It felt oddly fitting given the weather outside. I shot her a message, half expecting it to be ignored like usual. To my surprise, she replied almost instantly. "Hey there," she wrote, followed by a winking emoji. Her responses were quick, witty, and just a little mysterious. Before I knew it, we'd been messaging for hours. At one point, she asked, "What's your night looking like?" I told her, "Nothing exciting, just me, the couch, and a bad horror movie." "Want some company?" she replied. I hesitated. I didn't usually invite strangers over, but there was something about Maria. It felt safe. So, against my better judgment, I sent her my address. She responded almost immediately. "Be there soon." Before I could ask for her number, her profile went offline. I stared at the screen for a minute, waiting for her to come back, but nothing. Eventually, I shrugged it off, figuring she'd message again when she was on her way. Time passed slower than usual. I kept glancing at the clock and checking the app to see if Maria had come back online. The longer I waited, the more I started second-guessing myself. Had I come off too eager? Maybe she changed her mind. An hour turned into 2, and by then, it was almost midnight. I was starting to feel ridiculous for even getting my hopes up. I decided to call it a night. As I got into bed, I couldn't shake this nagging feeling. Something about the whole interaction had left me unsettled. It wasn't anything she said exactly, just the way she disappeared without explanation. I shook my head, telling myself I was overthinking. People ghost all the time, right? I woke up to the sound of rain against my window and the faint glow of my phone. It was 3:17 a.m. Groggily, I picked it up to check for messages, and that's when I saw it. Notifications from Connectus. Maria had messaged me. Her first message was sent at 2:30 a.m. On my way. Then at 2:55 a.m. Here. And finally, at 3:10 a.m. I see you. My heart stopped. I glanced at the window, my breath fogging up the cold glass as I leaned closer to look outside. Nothing. Just darkness and rain. I swallowed hard, telling myself it was some kind of joke. Then my phone buzzed again. Another message from Maria. How did you sleep? My chest tightened as I stared at the screen, my thumb hovering over the keyboard. I typed back, "Who is this? This isn't funny." My hands were shaking as I hit send. The reply came almost immediately. "Check your closet." My eyes darted across the room to the closet door. I swear it had been shut when I went to bed, but now it was slightly open, just enough to see the dark void inside. My breath caught in my throat. Every horror movie I'd ever watched played in my head at that moment. My mind screamed for me to get up, to move, but I was frozen. Then the door moved. It didn't fly open like in the movies, but it creaked, slow and deliberate, until the darkness inside seemed to swallow the sliver of light from my room. I could feel my heartbeat in my ears as I finally found my voice and screamed, "Dad!" I bolted out of bed, refusing to look at the closet as I ran for the hallway. My dad's room was down the hall, but when I got there, it hit me. He wasn't home. He'd left for a work trip, and I'd completely forgotten. The bed was empty, the room silent. My older brother was staying over that weekend, though, so I ran to his room. I pounded on the door until he opened it, his face a mix of confusion and irritation. "What the hell is going on?" he asked. I grabbed his arm, practically dragging him back to my room. "Someone's in my closet," I yelled. We stopped at the doorway of my room, both of us staring at the closet. It was still open, the dark interior looking more like a black hole than a space for clothes. My brother grabbed a baseball bat he'd left in the hallway earlier and stepped inside. I stayed near the door, clutching my phone like it would save me. "Hello?" he called out, his voice shaky despite the bravado he was trying to project. There was no answer. He swung the closet door fully open and pulled aside my clothes, checking every corner. Nothing. The closet was empty. "That's not possible," I muttered, stepping closer. I saw it move. I know what I saw. My brother frowned and looked around. "Your window's open," he said, pointing at the rain dripping onto the carpet. I hadn't even noticed it in my panic. He walked over and slammed it shut. "You probably left it open, and the wind pushed the door," he said, trying to sound rational. "You've been watching too many scary movies." I didn't respond. Something about this didn't feel right. I grabbed my phone and showed him the messages. His face darkened as he scrolled through them. "Okay," he said, his voice quieter now. "That's messed up." We decided to check the rest of the house, but nothing seemed out of place. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that something, or someone, had been in my room. By the time we were done, it was almost 4:30 a.m. My brother stayed up with me, but neither of us said much. We just sat in the living room, the baseball bat resting on the coffee table between us. When I finally drifted off to sleep, the sound of the rain was still echoing in my ears. I woke up to the smell of coffee and my brother pacing the kitchen. The events of the night before hit me like a freight train, and for a moment, I debated whether it had all been some sort of messed up dream. But then I saw my phone, still sitting on the coffee table, the messages from Maria burned into the screen. It had been real. "I've been thinking," my brother said as I joined him. "You should go to the police." I nodded. He was right. Even if it was some kind of prank, this wasn't normal. I needed answers, or at the very least, someone who could track down this Maria. By late morning, I was sitting in a sterile, fluorescent-lit room at the local police station. I explained everything, showing the messages and detailing the events from the previous night. The officer took notes, his face a mix of skepticism and concern. Unfortunately, he said, closing his notepad, tracking someone through these apps isn't as simple as it seems. We'd need a warrant to get user data from the company, and that takes time. So, what am I supposed to do? Just wait? I asked, frustration boiling over. We'll keep a report on file, he said, and I'd recommend staying somewhere else for a while just to be safe. I left feeling more helpless than ever. Maria, or whoever was behind that profile, was still out there, and now I had no way of knowing if or when they might come back. That night, I stayed at my brother's place. He tried to convince me to delete the app, but I couldn't bring myself to do it just yet. I needed to see if Maria would message again. I needed answers. For the next few days, I lived in a state of constant paranoia. Every noise, every shadow, every gust of wind felt like a threat. I double-checked my locks, closed my curtains, and even started sleeping with a knife under my pillow. Maria's profile stayed offline, and a part of me started to believe it was over. Maybe they'd gotten bored and moved on. Maybe it really had been just a cruel joke. Then on the fifth night, my phone buzzed. I was lying in bed staring at the ceiling, and the sound made my heart jump into my throat. I grabbed the phone with trembling hands and looked at the screen. A new message from Maria. I had fun. Before I could even react, another notification popped up. This one wasn't from the app. It was a photo message. When I opened it, my blood ran cold. It was a picture of me, asleep, taken from the foot of my bed. I dropped the phone, my breath coming in shallow gasps as I scrambled to turn on every light in the house. My brother came rushing in, but by the time we searched every room, whoever had taken that picture was gone. I deleted the app that night. I changed my locks, installed cameras, and spent months jumping at every sound. The police never found Maria, or whoever was behind that profile. And I never got another message. But sometimes late at night I still hear the faint ding of a notification in my head. And I wonder if she's still out there, watching. It all started on a random Tuesday night. I was lying on my couch half watching some terrible reality TV show and half swiping through Tinder. I wasn't looking for anything serious, just bored out of my mind. Most of the time, it was a cycle of pointless conversations or matches that never went anywhere. But then I saw her. Her name was Lila. She had fiery red curls, piercing green eyes, and a smile that could stop traffic. Her bio was short and sweet. Adventurous spirit looking for someone who can keep up. She was absolutely stunning, like out of my league stunning. When I swiped right and saw "It's a Match" pop up on my screen, I was equal parts shocked and excited. What really threw me off was that she messaged me first. Girls like her didn't usually do that. Her opener was simple. "Hey, how's your night going?" It wasn't the most creative, but I didn't care. She had my full attention. We started talking, and the conversation flowed effortlessly. She was funny, sharp, and had this flirty energy that pulled me in. By the time she suggested meeting up, I was already hooked. "I know this great spot in Prospect Park," she said. "It's quiet, peaceful, and perfect for a late-night hangout." Prospect Park at night? It seemed a little odd, but she assured me it was safe and close to her place. Plus, I didn't want to come off as nervous, so I agreed. I arrived at the park a little before 10 p.m. The place was dead silent, with only a faint breeze rustling the leaves. I parked my car and followed Lila's directions to a bench near the lake. The glow of the moon reflected on the water, giving the whole area an eerie vibe. I texted her, "Hey, I'm here." She replied almost instantly, "Running late. Just wait by the bench. I'll be there soon." I tried to brush off the weird feeling creeping over me. It was probably just nerves. Still, the silence of the park felt unnatural, like the whole place was holding its breath. There was an old bathroom building nearby, one of those concrete blocks with flickering motion sensor lights. For some reason, it gave me the creeps. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched, but every time I glanced around, there was nothing but trees and shadows. After about 10 minutes, my phone buzzed again. Almost there. Can't wait to meet you. I stared at the message, feeling a mix of anticipation and unease. Something about this whole setup didn't sit right, but I told myself I was just overthinking. While I sat on the bench, I heard a metallic clang coming from the bathroom building. It wasn't loud, but in the stillness of the park, it sounded like an explosion. My heart skipped a beat. Maybe it was just an animal, or the wind. I kept telling myself that, but then my phone buzzed again. Come to the bathroom, I've got a surprise for you. A surprise? In there? I stared at the building. The door was slightly ajar, and the flickering light above it made the shadows dance in the doorway. I tried to laugh it off. Maybe she was trying to be playful, but my gut told me something was wrong. Still, I got up and started walking toward the bathroom. Each step felt heavier than the last. When I was about 20 feet away, I heard another noise, a soft shuffling like someone moving inside. As I got closer, I saw it, a face. It was pale, almost gray, with hollow eyes that seemed to pierce through me. The person was peeking out from the edge of the door, watching me. I froze, my breath caught in my throat. The face disappeared just as quickly as it had appeared, retreating into the darkness of the bathroom. Then my phone buzzed again. Why are you hesitating? Come in. Every nerve in my body screamed at me to run, but my feet wouldn't move. I tried to convince myself it was all a joke, a weird prank or something, but deep down I knew better. Suddenly the bathroom door creaked open wider and I heard the faintest sound of breathing. That was it. I turned and walked as quickly as I could back toward the bench. When I thought I was far enough, I broke into a sprint, my heart pounding in my ears. I reached the parking lot, fumbling with my keys. As I unlocked the car, I dared to glance back at the park. That's when I saw him. A tall figure in a hooded sweatshirt emerged from the trees, moving fast, too fast. He was coming straight for me. I jumped into my car, slamming the door and locking it just as he reached the edge of the lot. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely turn the key in the ignition. The car roared to life and I threw it into drive, speeding out of there without looking back. But as I turned onto the road, my phone buzzed one last time. Leaving so soon? When I got home, I locked every door and window, double-checking each one. My heart was still racing and I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone. I opened Tinder to block Lila, or whoever she was, but her profile was gone. It was like she had never existed. For days, I couldn't stop thinking about what had happened. Who was that man in the park? How did he know I was there? And most importantly, what would have happened if I had gone into that bathroom? I'll never know the answers, but one thing's for sure. I'll never use a dating app again. Had always been skeptical about dating apps, but living in Portland, Oregon, with its mix of quirky coffee shops and endless rain, didn't exactly make it easy to meet people. After my last breakup, I wasn't looking for anything serious, just casual fun. That's when I downloaded Hinge, the so-called relationship app. I figured it couldn't hurt to swipe around. It wasn't long before I came across Sarah's profile. Her picture stood out. Black hair, pale skin, piercing green eyes, and a smile that seemed both warm and a little mischievous. But it wasn't just her looks. Her bio intrigued me. Fan of gothic literature, true crime junkie, and lover of abandoned places. It was weird, sure, but it felt authentic, like she wasn't trying too hard to impress anyone. Our chats started light. Favorite books, weird places we'd visited, favorite late-night snacks. But there was an intensity to the way she messaged, like she was genuinely interested in every word I said. By the third day, I suggested meeting up. Not really a fan of loud bars, she replied. Can we hang out at your place? I feel safer that way. It felt like an odd thing to say. Safer at a stranger's house? But I didn't question it too much. My neighborhood was safe, and my place was clean. Besides, her openness was refreshing. Sarah showed up around 8 p.m. right on time. She looked just like her photos, but there was something different. Her energy. She was quiet, her eyes darting around like she was taking in every detail of my place. I told myself she was probably just nervous, and I tried to keep the conversation light as I made her some tea. We settled on the couch to watch a movie. I picked a comedy, hoping it would ease the awkwardness. It didn't. Sarah barely spoke, only answering questions with short, clipped sentences. Her eyes kept drifting away from the screen, scanning the room as if she were looking for something. I tried to fill the silences with small talk, my job, my favorite spots in Portland, random trivia about the movie, but it felt like I was talking to myself. She'd nod occasionally, her lips twitching into a faint smile, but she was clearly elsewhere. "Do you like living alone?" she asked suddenly, cutting through the quiet. Her tone caught me off guard, soft but deliberate. Yeah, it's nice to have my own space," I replied, trying to sound casual. She nodded, her gaze drifting to the hallway that led to my bedroom. "It must get lonely sometimes." The comment sent a chill down my spine. It wasn't the words, it was the way she said it, like she wasn't asking but stating a fact. I laughed nervously, brushing it off. "Sometimes, yeah." The movie ended and I stretched, feeling the awkwardness settle in again. "Well, I guess I should... Can I stay here tonight?" she interrupted, her voice flat. I froze. "Stay here? Like, crash on the couch?" She nodded. "I don't feel safe driving back this late." Her request caught me off guard. It wasn't something I'd usually agree to, but she didn't seem drunk or dangerous, just strange. "Yeah, sure. Let me grab you some blankets." I set up the couch for her, and she thanked me quietly before lying down and turning away. I headed to bed, still feeling that strange energy lingering in the room. Sometime in the middle of the night, I woke up. My room was dark except for the faint glow of my alarm clock. 2:47 a.m. Something felt off. It wasn't a sound or a movement, just a gut feeling. I sat up, listening. Then I heard it, a faint murmuring coming from downstairs. My walls are thin, so every little sound carries. It wasn't the TV or music, it was a voice, soft, low, and steady. I got out of bed, heart pounding, and crept to my bedroom door. Peering down the dark hallway, I could see a faint light coming from the kitchen. My stomach twisted. Was Sarah on the phone, or was someone else in the house? I moved down the stairs as quietly as I could, my breath catching with every creak of the floorboards. The murmuring grew louder. When I reached the kitchen doorway, I froze. Sarah was sitting at the table, her back to me. The lamp above the table cast a dim glow over her, but it didn't soften the eerie scene. She was hunched over, scribbling furiously in a notebook. Her voice was low, almost a whisper, but there was no one else there. "Sarah?" I said, my voice trembling. She stopped writing but didn't turn around. "You shouldn't be awake," she said softly, almost to herself. What are you doing?" I asked, stepping closer. She slowly turned her head, her green eyes glinting in the dim light. "Just writing," she replied. Her face was calm, but there was something unnerving about her expression, like she was holding back a smile. "Go back to bed." I backed away, the unease crawling over me like static. "Okay. Good night," I stammered, retreating to the stairs. As soon as I was back in my room, I locked the door. My hands were shaking as I sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the door. What the hell was she writing? And why was she whispering to herself like that? My mind raced with possibilities, none of them good. I don't know how long I sat there before I heard the footsteps, slow, deliberate, creaking on the stairs. I held my breath, staring at the crack under the door. The shadows moved. She was standing right outside. The doorknob rattled, and I froze. Then came the knock. 3 soft, deliberate taps. "Ryan?" she called, her voice calm and sweet. "Can I come in?" I didn't answer. My heart was pounding so hard I thought it might burst. "Ryan," she said again, her tone shifting, still calm, but firmer. "Let me in." I backed away, grabbing my phone. My hands were shaking so badly it took me 3 tries to dial 911. As the call connected, I whispered, "Someone's in my house. She's trying to get into my room." The operator stayed on the line asking questions, but I could barely focus. The doorknob stopped rattling. The silence was deafening. Then, with a sudden crash, the door burst open. Sarah charged at me, her face twisted into a snarl. The crash of the door slamming open felt like thunder in the small room. Before I could react, Sarah was on me, her hands clawing at my throat with an intensity that didn't match her slim frame. Her nails dug into my skin as she screamed, her voice guttural and raw, like she was releasing years of pent-up rage. I stumbled backward, the phone slipping from my hand and clattering to the floor. My instincts kicked in and I grabbed her wrists, trying to pull her hands away. She was shockingly strong, but adrenaline coursed through me. I twisted her arms away and shoved her back, sending her sprawling onto the floor. She didn't stay down. She scrambled to her feet, her green eyes wild, and lunged at me again. This time, I was ready. I sidestepped her and grabbed the chair from my desk, holding it in front of me like a makeshift shield. "Sarah, stop!" I shouted, my voice cracking. She froze for a moment, breathing heavily. Then she tilted her head, a twisted smile creeping onto her face. "You shouldn't have invited me," she whispered. I didn't wait to find out what she meant. I bolted for the door, shoving past her and running down the hallway. Behind me, I could hear her footsteps pounding against the floor as she chased after me, her screams echoing through the house. I made it to the bathroom and slammed the door shut, locking it just as she reached it. She pounded on the door, screaming my name over and over. "You can't hide forever, Ryan," she yelled, her voice shrill and full of fury. I backed away, grabbing my phone from the counter where I'd left it earlier. The 911 operator was still on the line, their voice faint over the chaos. "She's trying to kill me," I shouted into the phone, my voice shaking. "Stay on the line," the operator said firmly. "Officers are on their way." The minutes felt like hours as I huddled in the bathroom, clutching the phone like a lifeline. Sarah's pounding eventually stopped, replaced by an eerie silence. I pressed my ear against the door, straining to hear any movement. The silence stretched on, broken only by my own ragged breathing. Then, from downstairs, I heard the sound of glass shattering. My heart leapt into my throat. Was she breaking a window, trying to escape? Or worse, was she letting someone else in? The wail of sirens outside jolted me out of my thoughts. Relief flooded through me as I heard the heavy footsteps of police officers storming into the house. "Police, is anyone here?" a voice boomed. I flung the bathroom door open and ran downstairs. Sarah was nowhere to be seen, but the broken window in the kitchen told me where she'd gone. The officers moved quickly, searching the area, and within minutes, they found her crouched behind a bush in my backyard. She was clutching her notebook to her chest, rocking back and forth and muttering to herself. They arrested her without much resistance, though she kept glancing at me over her shoulder as they led her away. Her expression wasn't angry. It was calm, almost serene. That unnerved me more than anything. The next day, the police called me in to give a full statement. They also showed me what was in Sarah's notebook, and it sent a chill down my spine. Every page was filled with detailed notes about me, what I'd said in our chats, what I'd worn that night, the layout of my house. There were even sketches of my bedroom, down to the position of my bed and the lamp on my nightstand. But the most disturbing part? There were entries about other men, names, addresses, details about their routines. The officers told me they were investigating several disappearances connected to her. One man's name had a chilling note next to it. Done. I couldn't shake the thought of how close I'd come to being her next victim. I changed the locks on my doors, installed cameras, and even started sleeping with a baseball bat next to my bed. But none of it made me feel safe. I deleted all my dating apps and started avoiding meeting new people altogether. The experience had shaken me to my core, leaving me paranoid and distrustful. Every time I close my eyes, I see her face, those wide, unblinking eyes and that unsettling smile. If you're listening to this, let my story be a warning. Dating apps can seem like a harmless way to meet people, but you never really know who's on the other end. Always meet in public. Always tell someone where you're going. And always, always trust your instincts. Because sometimes the person you swipe right on isn't looking for love. They're looking for something much darker. It had been almost a year since my first real breakup. I was 22 now and still adjusting to the single life. For years I'd been in relationships, and suddenly being alone felt foreign. After spending months focusing on work and hanging out with friends, I decided to give dating another shot. But of course things weren't the same. Dating apps were the new normal, and everyone I knew seemed to meet people online. Reluctantly, I downloaded a few apps: Tinder, Bumble, Hinge, you name it. Swiping through endless profiles felt weird, like shopping for people. But after a couple of weeks, I matched with a girl named Alyssa. She had this radiant smile and curly brown hair that framed her face perfectly. Her bio was short but interesting. Movie nerd, hiking enthusiast, and hopeless foodie, looking for someone to laugh at bad horror movies with. It felt genuine, not overly curated like so many other profiles. We started chatting, and I was hooked. Alyssa was funny, kind, and quick-witted. We bonded over our shared love of classic films, especially Hitchcock, and our obsession with spicy food. After a week of messaging, I finally worked up the courage to ask her out. She said yes, suggesting I pick her up at her place so we could grab dinner at a spot she knew in Beacon Hill. It felt a little old-fashioned, but I liked that. She gave me her address, and we set the date for Friday evening. As the day approached, I found myself growing more excited. I hadn't felt this way in a long time. Friday finally came. I spent an embarrassing amount of time picking out an outfit, eventually settling on a casual button-up and my favorite jeans. As I drove toward Beacon Hill, the golden glow of the setting sun reflected off the brick buildings. The neighborhood was old and charming, with cobblestone streets and historic row houses. It was the kind of place you'd see in postcards. Her address, however, was on the edge of Beacon Hill, where the charm started to fade into something grittier. The houses looked older and more run down, with peeling paint and overgrown lawns. I parked in front of the address she'd given me, a weathered, two-story house with a porch that looked like it hadn't been swept in years. I texted Alyssa to let her know I'd arrived. The minutes ticked by and I found myself staring at the conversation thread, waiting for those little typing bubbles to appear. Finally, she replied, "Hey, sorry for the wait. My brother Marcus wants to meet you first. He's super protective, LOL." The message made my stomach tighten. I wasn't thrilled about meeting her brother, especially not before even meeting her. But I wanted to make a good impression, so I played it cool. "No problem," I replied, trying to sound chill. A moment later, the front door creaked open and a man stepped out. Marcus was huge, easily 6'4", with broad shoulders and a serious expression. His dark eyes scanned me as he walked down the steps. "You must be Matt," he said, extending a hand. His voice was deep and steady. "That's me," I replied, shaking his hand. His grip was firm, almost too firm. Marcus smiled, but there was something about it that didn't feel quite right. I just wanted to make sure my sister's date wasn't some weirdo, you know? "Of course," I said, laughing nervously. Marcus gestured toward the house. "Come on inside. Alyssa's still getting ready." I hesitated. Something about the house didn't sit right with me, but I didn't want to be rude. "Sure," I said, following him up the steps. The inside was dimly lit, with old, mismatched furniture and a musty smell that clung to the air. The living room was cluttered with random items: an old TV, stacks of magazines, and a few cracked picture frames. None of the photos had people in them, though. Just generic landscapes, like something you'd find in a thrift store. "Wait here," Marcus said, motioning to the couch. "I'll go grab Alyssa." "Cool," I replied, sitting down. As Marcus disappeared up the stairs, I noticed two men sitting on another couch across the room. I hadn't seen them when I walked in. Both were large like Marcus, and their eyes locked on me immediately. "Hey," I said, forcing a smile. Neither of them responded. One just stared, while the other gave a barely perceptible nod. The tension in the room was suffocating. I tried to focus on my phone, pretending to text, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was very wrong. Minutes passed, and Marcus still hadn't come back. I glanced toward the staircase, then back at the two men, who were still staring at me. "Is Alyssa almost ready?" I called out, trying to mask the unease in my voice. "Yeah, she'll be right down," Marcus shouted from upstairs. I glanced toward the adjacent dining room and froze. Another man was sitting at the table, staring at me. That made 3. My pulse quickened. Why were there so many people here? I stood up, trying to act casual. "You know what? I just remembered I left something in my car. I'll be right back." As I moved toward the door, one of the men on the couch stood up. "Where are you going?" he asked, his voice low and menacing. Before I could answer, Marcus's voice boomed from upstairs. "Grab him!" My heart leapt into my throat. I didn't think, I just acted. I flung the front door open and bolted down the porch steps. Behind me, I could hear the men shouting and pounding after me. "Get him!" one of them roared. My car was just a few feet away, but every step felt like an eternity. My hands shook as I fumbled with the keys. Just as I got the door unlocked, I felt a hand graze my shoulder. I threw myself into the driver's seat and slammed the door shut. One of the men pounded on the window, his face twisted with rage. Another kicked the door, leaving a deep dent. I turned the key and the engine roared to life. Without looking back, I slammed on the gas, the tires screeching as I sped away. When I got home, I was still shaking. My mom and dad were sitting in the living room, startled when I burst in. "What happened?" my mom asked, her face pale. I told them everything, from the match on Tinder to the terrifying escape. My dad called the police immediately, and I gave them all the details. The next day, I got a call from the police. The house was empty when they arrived, but they found evidence of a staged operation, multiple fake IDs, burner phones, and weapons. Alyssa's profile, as I suspected, was a complete fabrication. The experience left me shaken to my core. I deleted every dating app and swore off online dating for good. To this day, I can still see the faces of those men when I close my eyes, hear their footsteps chasing me, feel the sheer panic of that night. If you're reading this, let it be a warning. Not everyone online is who they claim to be, and sometimes the person you're meeting might not even exist at all.